All right, I think we can get started. So good evening and welcome everybody to the first public meeting for the Shoreline Study. I'm Poulumi Sen, I'm a planner with the city and I'm project managing the study. I want to thank you all for taking the time this evening to provide your feedback. Your input is really key to developing this plan for the riverfront. And before we get started and I hand over the presentation to our consultant, I just quickly wanted to go over some of the Zoom features. I know we're all getting familiar with using these tools, so I just want to make sure that everybody is on board with what we're doing today. So to start with, we will be using polls. If you'll see a pop-up on your screen, which will have some options, and you can choose and select these options. We will also be asking you to comment in some of the questions. So if you see the chat option here in the navigation pane, there's a gray navigation pane at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and it should say chat. That's where the cursor is right now. So if you click on that, it'll pop open a dialog box to the right of your screen, and you should be able to write in your questions or your answers as we require. And then the second thing we are using, in case you're not able to comment, box, the Q&A section. So you will see the Q&A that we have here. So the cursor is right now on the Q&A. You can ask your questions and we can help you navigate through whatever concerns you might have as we go along. The third feature is raising your hand, which is not shown here, but it's just a hand icon. I hope you're able to still hear me. My internet is a bit unstable every now and then. So you should be able to see the hand icon and you can click on that and we will unmute you and you can verbally voice your concerns and questions and provide feedback. For those of you joining on call, *9, you press *9 and you should be able to raise your hand and we can unmute you and you should be able to talk. So now I'll just hand over to Rochelle to get started with the meeting.
Thanks, Poulumi, and thank you everybody who is joining us tonight. It's really exciting to be in the public engagement portion of the Hudson River Shoreline Stabilization Study. My name is Rochelle McKnight. I am the project manager for the study. I'm also a landscape architect and arborist. I live here in the city of Albany. I'm in the Delaware Avenue neighborhood and I bike a lot down by the riverfront. I use the riverfront quite a lot, and so I'm really thrilled that we get to do this study and that I'm very much hoping that we'll be able to make a positive impact on the shoreline. So thank you all for joining us today. Dan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Dan Biggs. I'm the regional manager of our Albany office and happy to support the team here and see the project move successfully through the study and hopefully into further design in the coming months and years.
Okay, so to start out, I'm going to introduce our company. Again, we are with Weston & Sampson. We're a full-service planning, landscape architecture, engineering, and environmental consulting firm. We do a huge variety of different types of engineering and LA services. We do surveying and mapping, site and civil engineering, especially in our office, we do quite a bit of planning, definitely public outreach, graphic communication, and in particular, my specific skill set in our office does a lot of work on shoreline stabilization, which you're going to learn quite a bit more about throughout the course of the presentation. So just to give you a small sampling of some of our projects, we worked on sustainable shoreline at Hudson Shores Park in Waterville, New York. That project will go into construction relatively soon. Everything's been delayed due to COVID and other complications, but basically a shoreline stabilization project there in Waterville. We're working down in Kingston right now on a full design and construction document project for shoreline stabilization and public access in the Rondout Riverport. It's an awesome job. And then over in Boston, Massachusetts, we work all over the Northeast. So we do stabilization work in New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, all over New York State, downstate as well. But one of our biggest projects we have right now is in Boston, Massachusetts, and that is 17 miles of vegetation analysis, management, shoreline stabilization, habitat restoration. So this is what we love to do, and we're happy to be able to do it for Albany. So just to briefly review the meeting agenda, and I'm going to kind of try to be as succinct and move as not quickly, but as effectively through the presentation, because I definitely want to make sure that everybody has a chance to raise their hands, ask questions, and really participate in the study. That's really what makes it fun. And we're looking for public input for the study, so please feel free to chime in. But just to go through the agenda, we're going to be talking about the study holistically. We'll go over what type of work we've done to date. We've got quite a bit accomplished so far. We'll do an in-depth review of the project area. We're going to discuss climate change and how it relates directly to the project and to Albany, especially along the riverfront. We'll discuss shoreline stabilization, including the definitions of this type of work, public access along the riverfront, public engagement, community participation, ways to maintain the riverfront once some of these designs go through and some of the implementation happens along the riverfront. We want to make sure that we can take care of it and have ownership of it. And then the most exciting part is to go through open discussion and start talking about some of the next steps of the project. So this is the basic overview of the study. What we're trying to do is to look at the entire shoreline along the city of Albany. We'll go through the project area, but it's basically 5 miles of shoreline. And we're trying to understand what's happening along the shoreline and the riverfront at this moment, at this sort of blink in time. And then to come up with a long-term strategy for restoring and enhancing the riverfront. That doesn't just mean ecological restoration and shoreline stabilization, but also how do we provide equitable access to the riverfront and make it a much more enjoyable place? It's already awesome, but we want to make sure that people have greater access to it in the years to come and can enjoy it even more. One thing to say is the project was funded in part by the New York State Environmental Protection Fund, so we want to say thank you for that we have this opportunity. And we'll go through sort of the timeline next and to sort of talk about what's going to make a good project, particularly with this study. So this is the timeline. This is a basic overview. We started early summer of 2020. We originally had the project back in February and March, but of course, as everybody knows, the pandemic hit, so things got kind of stalled and delayed. We did have an opportunity to go out and start doing some of our field investigations in the late spring and the early summer. We've compiled a field summary report. We've been sharing that with the project advisory committee made up of agency officials and stakeholders. And now we are, as you know, because you're here, in the public engagement portion of the project. So what we want to make sure of is that we are involving the community as much as possible in different phases of the project. That's what we think long-term is going to make this really an excellent project that will actually serve the city of Albany and the constituents in Albany. And so we're trying to make sure that we go in, we do our field research, we do our analysis, and we come back, we interact with the community. We're giving more information step by step as we go through. So as we move into the winter this year, we're going to be going through draft design concept. This is a study, so it will be conceptual design. We're not going to go through any sort of design documents or construction documents, anything like that, but more of like a planning phase design. And then in the spring of 2021, we're hoping to have another public engagement session to review these ideas once again with the public to make sure that we've captured everything that people told us about and that we are serving the community the best way that we possibly can. And then again in spring 2021, we plan to have that final report published and available for use by the city. So now we'll take a look at the project area, and what we're going to do throughout the course of the study intermittently, or throughout the course of the presentation, I mean, is we are going to be asking you poll questions. So whenever you see a slide that has a red banner to the right-hand portion of the slide, You will be prompted with poll questions, and it would be awesome if you all can deliver responses to those poll questions so that we're able to tally and calculate what people are thinking in terms of percentages of questions answered and what people are feeling about the project. And I just remembered that we also want to do closed captioning on this, so give me just a minute so that we can get that going. We are also recording the presentation for everybody's information. So if anybody has to step away and come back, just rest assured that the presentation will be available to you after it's done. So going over the project area here, like I said, the total project area is about a length of 5 miles here. I'm going to leave this poll question right off to the right here. Moving from south to north, we start at Island Creek Park. Now you'll notice the north arrow is a little skewed here. Normally you would think of the Hudson River running south to north, and that is the case, of course, but for the purposes of the presentation and to get the graphic on the page, we have it running east to west, but just keep in mind that the north arrow is off to the side here. So we're starting at Island Creek Park to the south, which is just to the east of the South End Historic District. Moving forward or moving along the riverfront, we have the Corning Riverfront Park, which is probably the most popular of all of the parks along the riverfront. And then moving again north, we have the Riverfront Preserve over here. The Riverfront Preserve is a beautiful stretch of land with a bike path. I would consider that to be the most natural of all of the project area. So we've got this poll in progress, as you can see here. So the first question is, how many times per month do you visit the Albany riverfront? It's looking like at the moment we've got 14 out of 19 people who have answered so far, just about one time per month. So I think we're going to try to leave these polls open for about 40 seconds apiece because we want to make sure that we're moving through the presentation effectively. So we'll just go ahead and say that the majority of participants, at least in this case, are visiting the Albany riverfront one time per month. The next poll question is going to be, what do you like to do at the riverfront? So if you all have an opportunity to comment in the chat box, we can share some of those results, trying to get an idea of what people enjoy doing at this current juncture along the riverfront. All right. And then Paloma, do you want to share the chat box here?
I'm not able to share the chat box, but I can read it out. So we have...
Oh, here we go. Now it's shared. I think it just had to end. Okay, so this is awesome. It looks like people are doing a lot of biking, bird watching, lots of walking, rowing. So it's great to see that people are using not only the parks, but are actually getting into the water as well. Super cool. Okay, awesome. Thank you everybody for answering those questions. I'm going to minimize this chat box, but we will have it open for other questions as well. Okay, so moving on, why is the study important? So there's a number of different reasons why we're doing this study. There are a couple that really rise to the top, and those include protecting the riverfront and the adjacent infrastructure, which includes a lot of roads and utilities, homes, businesses, from flooding, from current flooding and from future flooding that is related to climate change. And we'll discuss that a little bit further as we move through the presentation. But we also want to be sure that as we're enhancing that shoreline, that we are providing public access and making the riverfront the amenity that it really should be for the city of Albany. Again, it's a wonderful area as it is, but we just want to make sure that as we're looking long-term out in the next 10 to 30 years, that we're really improving access to the riverfront. So looking at some of these critical success factors, we're definitely doing an analysis of climate change. That includes heavier storms, heavier precipitation, more intense storms, but also flooding that is a result of sea level rise. We're doing an evaluation of the shoreline. What does the shoreline currently look like? What types of erosion are we seeing along the shoreline? Where can it be improved? Natural systems restoration, where can we do habitat restoration? Where can we make the shoreline more hospitable to plants and critters? And also hospitable to people, because people love to have a natural landscape when possible, especially close to an urban environment. It's a very welcome amenity for most people. But we're also looking at public health and safety and accessibility. So how can people access the riverfront? Can they bike? Can they walk? And can they do that in a safe manner? And is it also equitable to all types of people who might want to visit the riverfront? So some of the performance measures that we're using, as I mentioned before, we have a large team of engineers. We have hydrologists at Weston and Sampson as well. So we've taken a look and done some mapping of sea level rise, looking at some of the risk and analysis along the Albany shore. We are pretty well trained in shoreline condition analysis with all the projects that we've done. So we did extensive field work to analyze those shoreline conditions. Long term, we're going to be looking at prioritization of projects with all of these critical success factors. How do we balance public access with the need to reduce flood risk? And then also usefulness and relevance. We want to make sure that we're recommending improvements that will actually be useful for this city, not just, you know, as a blanket recommendation that we would say for any city, but we want to make it unique to Albany so that it's really appreciated by the people who live here. So the next thing I want to discuss, because it's a term that some people know about but not everybody, is shoreline stabilization. So I think that this definition here is a pretty good summary of what shoreline stabilization really means. So typically it refers to the use of engineered and natural or living structures to protect shorelines from erosion. That not only means rivers, but it can mean lakes, streams, any type of water body that is subject to flooding, waves, tidal flows, wind, things like that. So stabilization techniques, it has to not only be directed at the shoreline, but it's very important to ensure that you're also looking at the land management techniques around the shoreline. Sometimes even looking at a watershed scale, really getting a bird's eye view of what's happening adjacent to that shoreline to ensure that the stabilization techniques that are put in place are going to be effective, because everything around it is designed to ensure that you're decreasing the risk of flooding. So one of the reasons we do shoreline stabilization, sometimes erosion can occur along a shoreline because of simple factors like too many people walking down to the shore. You know, there's trees that can fall into the shoreline, simple things like that that occur every day. But in this instance, one of the main reasons we're looking at shoreline stabilization is because we are facing a pretty unprecedented risk from climate change. So this is a graphic that just outlines some of the factors that are included with climate change, which means we have to consider all of these types of variables when we're looking at climate change, especially as it relates to riverfront and shoreline stabilization. So as everybody, I'm sure, is experiencing, especially from this most recent summer and some of the wildfires you're seeing out west, things are getting very, very hot. We had a very dry summer. And then I'm sure that people have probably noticed that the storms, when we do have them, can be much more extreme, much more severe. So you can imagine that how that relates to shorelines, and that if you have a very extreme storm, a lot of stormwater runoff, that could cause pretty extreme erosion. There's more examples of hurricanes coming up this way, very strong winds. All of that contributes to destabilization of our riverfront. So discuss in particular some of these storm events. I wanted to show two different photographs here. this is a photograph of a flash flood that occurred in downtown Albany in 2014. This is Hackett Boulevard flooding back in 2018. And as you can see, oops, sorry guys. I don't know why that happened. All right, I guess I have to just deal with this little toolbar down here. That's all right. Oh, there it goes, it went away. So anyway, as you can see, flooding can occur very, very suddenly. I would expect most people have witnessed this in some version or another, but because precipitation events are getting more extreme, we are more likely to see this more often as the climate warms and as the climate changes. So one of the reasons we're looking at stabilizing the shoreline and improving the waterfront is to reduce some of the risk associated with this type of flooding. To follow up on that, this is a map, the current FEMA flood hazard area in the city of Albany. So to give an overview, FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and what they do is they provide flood hazard and risk data to help guide mitigation actions. So in this case, the mitigation action would be stabilizing and improving the shoreline. So this type of mapping, the reason it's created and how it's used is to inform the National Flood Insurance Program about insurance rates on properties that are within the flood area. So to give you an idea, these blue zones, you've got blue zones, orange zones, and there is very often this is sort of thrown around when we talk about flooding. There's a 1% annual chance flood hazard, and sometimes people refer to it as a 1 in a 100-year storm. And what that actually means, though, is each year you've got a 1% chance of a really extreme storm like this rolling through. So if you see these orange areas, which are further in Albany, this is just a 0.2% annual chance of a flood and a severe storm and flooding. And this is less likely to occur because you've only got a 0.2% chance each year. So as the climate warms and changes, we are going to see more of this type of, we are very likely to see more of this type of extreme weather and extreme flooding. So just to give you an idea, this all came from the New York State DEC. Projected sea level rise, they have it on a continuum. It depends on how fast the climate warms and what we're able to do to mitigate some of the warming. In the 2020s, sea level rise could be anywhere from 1 inches to 9 inches, 2050s, 5 inches to 27 inches, in 2100, 11 inches to 71 inches. So you can imagine, even with just a rise of 5 inches, this water is going to push back much more extremely into the city of Albany, because you've got much more water moving across the landscape because the level of the Hudson River is rising. So another point to chime in on here is that the Hudson River is considered a tidal river. So it comes in from the ocean, and so even though we're all the way up here in Albany, it is still subject to tidal flows and tidal fluctuations. So moving on, this is a review of some of the work that we've done so far. We did a really good comprehensive field analysis looking at all the existing shoreline conditions. We also worked from the office looking at background documents, environmental resource mapping, a lot of the previous studies that had been done, sort of the historic nature of the riverfront, and as you can see here, we've been documenting all along some of the erosion conditions and just the typical conditions that we see along the shore. So going back to how this pertains to flooding and climate change, we also did an analysis of the land use in Albany. So as you can see here from the legend, we've got this project area boundary here. The project area is highlighted in blue, but these blue areas here, this is all commercial development, this is industrial development. You've got these green areas, which are park spaces. You've got a lot of roadways and shared use paths along the corridor or the project area, and so that all makes a big impact on what you're going to see in terms of flooding. So when we start to think about flooding, what we look at is how much impervious versus pervious area exists within a project corridor. So in this case, in this 5-mile stretch of shoreline, we have about 25 acres of impervious area. So impervious means that when water comes down out of the sky, off of buildings, across the landscape, it doesn't have anywhere to go. So basically it's hitting rooftops, it's hitting pavement, it's hitting parking lots, sidewalks, roads, and that water, it's going to go either into your existing utility systems, or it's just going to flood and it's going to go somewhere else that it can soak into the ground, or it can be washed away in a stream or a river. So that is in contrast to pervious areas. Pervious areas are where the water hits the ground, and because the ground is open and there's soil and there's landscape, there's plants, the water can absorb directly into the ground. So that makes a big difference. How much pervious versus pervious area in your landscape makes a very large difference into how much flooding you're going to experience. If you can imagine, if this entire corridor was all just landscape and green and woods, you would have much less of a risk of upstream flooding, because that water would hit the corridor, it would absorb into the ground. But of course, because it's all developed, it's a very urban landscape, you're still going to have flooding from these impervious areas around the project area. So that's why it's important to always be thinking outside of the project envelope. So moving through, taking a look at the existing conditions along the shoreline here, you've got a variety of existing types of shoreline stabilization measures. So you've got what's called an engineered shoreline. It's a concrete bulkhead. These bulkheads, it's another type of term for retaining wall. They're typically very, very strong. They're constructed against the waterway. They're holding back the land. And what happens is the water hits them. It can splash up onto the adjacent infrastructure, but most of the time they are elevated at such a height that you're going to not have flooding on the other side of the bulkhead. So there's quite a bit of bulkhead along the urban waterfront here in Albany, as you can see, particularly adjacent to 787. These are some more examples of what that bulkhead looks like. And then, just to talk a little bit about other types of engineered shoreline stabilization, there's quite a bit of what we would call revetment. It's kind of a mix of revetment and riprap. It's old concrete blocks that were used to stabilize the shore probably quite a while ago. You've also got, just in terms of engineering along the shoreline, you have stormwater outfalls. That's where the combined sewer overflows happen, and different stormwater outfalls from the utility system go into the river. So these are generally hard structures that are containing pipes that have the outfalls into the river. You also have quite a bit of what we call mixed shoreline, and that is typically where you see some of these stabilization measures, and either by design or because nature has just kind of taken back over, you have a mix of engineered and natural shoreline conditions along the riverfront. So here's an example of that. Really down here at the bottom, there's some timber cribbing. It's a little hard to see here from this photo, but as you can see, there's lawn area. There's really severe erosion happening here. There's really almost no slope. It just drops right down into the water and into the timber cribbing. But as you can see, some of these plants are attempting to stabilize the shore on their own. Here's another example of a stormwater outfall, and you've got some timber cribbing here that is sort of degraded back into the natural landscape. This is in juxtaposition to wooded shorelines or completely natural riverine shorelines, and this is very often seen in the Riverfront Preserve, not really so much anywhere else along the shore, but even at the Riverfront Preserve there is a mix of revetment, sometimes just at the toe of the slope or the very bottom of the slope adjacent to the water. So, but this is where you're seeing most of your woods and natural landscape in the project area. As you can see here, there's quite a bit of instances where trees have fallen into the river. That's a completely natural process. This is an image of tidal flats. So sometimes when the tide goes out, it leaves these mud flats, and these are really good habitat areas for a variety of amphibious and marine critters. So that's really good to see. So now that you've had an opportunity to review the existing shorelines, we're going to ask another poll question. What I want to do as we move through the study is, if you guys can take a look at some of the opportunities and constraints. I've outlined quite a few of these, just reviewing the existing conditions. But this is what we're kind of dealing with along the shore as we frame the recommendations for this study. So we have opportunities for flood protection, definitely opportunities for enhanced habitat restoration, reduction of slopes, wildlife conservation, and increased public access. Some of the constraints we're seeing is that we have a lot of infrastructure. So we have roads, sidewalks, walls, we have 787. There's a lot of existing utilities out there that include electric, sewer, water, gas, etc. And then, of course, there's always budgetary constraints, maintenance constraints, and we are all living through a pandemic at the moment. So that changes a lot. I'm just going to let everybody contribute to the poll here.
Rochelle, you want to start the captioning as well while we wait?
Oh, did it stop?
Yeah.
I don't know why. Thanks, Paloma. Okay, so we're right at about a minute here. We've got 15 out of 16 people that have voted. So the question here is to please choose 3 topics that are most important to you for the future of the riverfront. And it looks like we're basically balanced with access to nature and nature restoration and access to the river, which includes kayaking, boating, and fishing. Definitely walking and bike access is also very important. Flood control. I think all of these are definitely important factors to consider. We just have to balance priorities as we move through the project. Okay, so now we're going to start to talk a little bit about some of what we can do to improve the shoreline along the city of the riverfront in Albany. So we're going to start with living shorelines. So living shorelines can be defined as stabilization measures, which use typically a kind of mix of some of those engineered measures, but then also provide enhanced opportunity for habitat restoration, vegetation establishment, increased buffer. So what I mean by buffer is typically there is a vegetative layer right along the edge of the shore of the river. And what we're looking for is to increase that buffer as much as it is feasible and realistic, because the more vegetation you have along that shoreline, the greater chance you have of stabilizing the shore and providing flood protection. And what's wonderful about increasing that vegetative buffer is then you're also providing habitat for a large variety of wildlife and critters, and increasing water quality, increasing the vegetative buffer adjacent to the river edge also provides habitat for fish and different amphibious species. So there's a couple of different options we look at when we're discussing living shorelines. Vegetation and riprap tends to be very popular. There's a lot of riprap already existing along the Albany riverfront. There is a potential to go back in and install some vegetation within that riprap, which not only provides more flood protection, but also just increases overall plant biodiversity along the shoreline. A lot of times we see restored wetlands and living shorelines. This is where wetlands have been degraded or sometimes altogether eliminated. We have definitely seen along the Albany shoreline that it's been somewhat what we call channelized. It's straightened, whereas a natural river, if you think about looking at beautiful rivers from above, they're very sinuous, they're very curvy, and so there could be opportunities to create more of a curvilinear design along the shoreline. Another thing that's really exciting in terms of flood protection are vegetated berms with flood storage. These are really cool because they're these giant sort of hilltop landscapes. You can put flood storage behind them. There are opportunities for public access along the top of them. Berms can be a really exciting way to stabilize the shore and provide flood protection. So here's just some section drawings of what that would look like adjacent to the shore. So basically you would have this vegetative buffer, hopefully a little bit of wetland reestablished, some aquatic species in the water. This is what a vegetated berm with some flood storage might look like. And again, this is all very conceptual. It's certainly not a design document, so it's all just in the planning phase right now. So it's really just for your visual enjoyment to see what's possible. So the other option we have, and it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all, it really depends on the different stretch of shoreline and what's behind it and what's needed. But engineered solutions are sometimes the only thing that's really practical in some instances. We always try wherever possible to go with living shorelines. They have proven to be much more effective long-term, and they provide so many co-benefits. But in some cases, especially adjacent to roadways and buildings and important infrastructure, you've got to have some of these engineered solutions. So they might include something like a steel bulkhead. Right now you've got a concrete bulkhead along most of the length of Albany. Steel is another option. The good thing about these bulkheads is as the sea level rises or the tide level changes along the Hudson River, you can adjust them over time to increase that height to provide greater flood protection. And then of course there's opportunities to have hopefully different types of habitat enhancements in front of those steel bulkheads, but it all really depends on what the bulkheads are used for and permitting considerations. So it gets to be a little bit of a tricky situation. Sometimes we have the best intentions and we want to do floating wetlands and things like that in front of these bulkheads, but it might not always be feasible. But certainly wherever possible, we want to make that happen. The other option here is for riprap reinforcement, and that can be practical in situations where you really don't have the budget or the maintenance capabilities to maintain a vegetated riprap solution. Here are some drawings, some sections to show what these might look like. The good thing about having a big bulkhead like this is you can tie up much larger vessels, boating, marine vessels, than you could certainly at a living shoreline. Living shorelines are, in some cases, very good for things like canoes and kayak launches. So we're going to move on to poll question number 4 here. Now that we've reviewed the different types of shoreline stabilization options, I want you all to consider, if possible, what you think about the aesthetics of the shore. So what are you most interested in seeing along the riverfront in Albany? There's the living shoreline certainly would provide more of a natural look. You can also have some of that natural look with a bit more of a parkland aesthetic, which is what you have right now at the Corning Riverfront Park. And then of course these engineered shorelines, they're much more practical looking. They're basically infrastructure, but sometimes that's what people are wanting to see in their cityscape. So we'll let the poll progress here. Like we've got people answering steadily, so thank you everybody for taking the time. Okay, so it looks like people are most interested in the parkland aesthetic, which includes some trails, manicured, mowed lawns, larger trees, and a combination of the qualities listed above, which I guess would include some of that nature aesthetic and parkland aesthetic. So that's awesome to see. So now we're going to move on to public access. We've been talking mostly about shoreline stabilization. So we're shifting gears a little bit, although it's all very much interrelated. So here's some overview examples of what currently exists along the shore. We have the Corning Riverfront Park. There are some awesome bike trails going through the Corning Riverfront Park, and also the Riverfront Preserve. This is the Riverfront Preserve down here. You've got some amazing open lawn space in the Riverfront Preserve. There's a bit of a wooded buffer, not quite as large as we would typically like to see in terms of flood storage and stabilization, but there's a lot of opportunity there for some different types of recreation and habitat restoration. At Island Creek Park, which is one of my favorite places now along the riverfront, They've got an awesome fishing pier here. There's a lot of picnicking, places to kind of relax around the park. And it's a great park. It's very heavily utilized. There are a lot of people that hang out there all the time, which is awesome. And certainly the Corning Riverfront Park has the best boating opportunities. You can launch your kayak in here. There's kayak rentals. There's boating opportunities galore at Corning Riverfront Park, not so much at some of the other places. And certainly Corning Riverfront Park has most of that manicured parkland aesthetic. So the other thing we want to talk about is how are people getting to the riverfront? So if you take a look at this overall map here, this is your project area highlighted in blue. There are some primary connections going through here along Vine Street from the South End Historic District and the Pastures District. There's the Broadway connection. Downtown also comes off of that Broadway connection. You've got the Hudson Riverway, it used to be called the Livingston Bridge, and then Colony Street down here in the Warehouse District. So the question is, how do you get to the riverfront? People are all answering now. The options are walk, take a bus, ride a bike, drive a car. It looks like from the poll that most people are driving a car. So that means they're accessing the riverfront and parking likely at some of the parking areas, which to my knowledge exist here at the Island Creek Park, and then again up here at the Corning Riverfront Park. So sounds like that's the majority of the way that people are getting to the riverfront, which is good to know. So just moving through here, just to sort of zoom in to some of these connections. Vine Street in the South End Historic District. You can definitely get there. There's the beautiful new South End connector, which gets you really, really close. Otherwise, if you're walking from the neighborhood, you've got to walk on sidewalks. This road can be kind of crazy, a little bit busy, but that's most of the way that people are getting to the park at this moment. If you're taking a bike or if you're walking out in the pastures, it's a similar situation. You're going underneath 787, and over here in the downtown area, you're also going underneath 787, where there are sidewalks, but not necessarily bike lanes at the moment. Looks like there's a bike lane over here, but not in all of the cases. In the central section, you've got this wonderful Hudson River Way bridge that goes over 787. That's the one opportunity you have to kind of see the roadway from above. I know that that's really heavily used. And you've got Colony Street here in the Warehouse District. So moving on here, it looks like we got a typo here. We want to talk about some of the amenities that you would like to see along the waterfront. So thinking about some of those opportunities and constraints that we discussed earlier, also thinking about the different types of shoreline stabilization. What would you like to see in these parks? What would increase your enjoyment of the parks? What would make you go to the riverfront more often? What do you think would benefit the city of Albany as a whole in terms of amenities along the riverfront? So some examples include more picnic tables, benches, boating and kayak launches, certainly fishing amenities. Island Creek Park definitely has the best fishing pier at the moment, but I've seen a lot of people fishing at the Corning Riverfront Park as well, off of the riprap at the bottom of the slope. Floating remediation islands, floating restaurants, bicycle access, and any others, and people can chime in the chat box if they would like. It looks like as a whole, people are very interested in boating and kayak launches, which is totally understandable, especially since at the moment there's one access point. It'd be really cool and fun to be able to tie in your kayak potentially up at the Riverfront Preserve and go all the way down to Island Creek Park and back, and to be able to get in and out at those places. So that's great to see. The other thing to ask with this is, going back to this slide here, what types of amenities would you like to see at specific parks? So we can start with Island Creek Park. Those of you who are familiar with Island Creek Park, what are some of the amenities that you think would be most appropriate for that particular park? I know that Island Creek Park is not necessarily the most widely used out of all the parks, certainly loved, but not everybody knows about it. So we'll leave the poll open just for a little bit longer. And as a reminder, Island Creek Park currently has some great benches and picnic areas. It has a fishing pier, does not have boating access at the moment. And so it's looking like, as a whole, that people are interested in bicycling access, which is great. They've got the wonderful South End connector, but right now there is not a connection point. I don't think that there are bike racks at Island Creek Park at the moment either, so people probably would use the park a lot more if there was biking access, so that's a great response. So now, looking at the Corning Riverfront Park, what types of amenities would people like to see there? Again, existing, we've got a boat kayak launch at the Corning Riverfront Park. There's a lot of parkland type settings. There's the bike path that people walk on and bike. There's a lot of picnicking opportunities. Parking is good at Corning Riverfront Park. Lots of festivals. Looks like people are chiming in the chat box, which is great to see. Leave it open just a little bit longer. Okay. So it looks like floating restaurants is the most popular. So that's really interesting. I hadn't seen that before, but I've certainly dined at floating restaurants. They're an awesome thing to get to go and do. And it's such an incredible view out there. It makes sense, especially if you're there and you're going to one of the concert series or a festival, or you're there and you're biking, to be able to stop and have a meal sounds pretty exciting. Okay, so finally we go up to the Riverfront Preserve, looking at the types of amenities you would like to see in this particular area. At the moment, there is the bike path, Mohawk Hudson Bike Trail, and there's quite a few benches, opportunities to do passive recreation, lots of lawn, open areas. Lots of woodlands. I've definitely seen people fishing there as well. But it's really kind of a blank canvas at the moment, which is cool. I'll leave it open until about 45 seconds. Okay. All right, so it looks like people are looking for more benches, picnic tables, and grills, more opportunities to enjoy the landscape, places to sit. I know that the bike path, you can go for quite a long distance along that bike path, so people are potentially wanting to get off their bikes and be able to enjoy the beautiful sun and the views in that park. The other thing that came to the top is boardwalks and nature watching, potentially river access points where you could get there via a boardwalk. And there's definitely tons of birds in that park and lots of other types of wildlife. So that's a great opportunity, especially if you're sitting on a bench, to be able to look at nature and enjoy nature. Okay? So moving on. So all of these stabilization measures that we've talked about and some of the amenity installations and improvements to the Riverfront Park, they do require maintenance. So especially with some of the living shorelines, it requires a couple of years of establishment. So you get all the plants in, you get everything built, but somebody needs to go out and kind of weed these areas, make sure that the trash isn't getting in there. The same thing goes for any of the amenities that you put in the park. I'm sure everybody's seen in different places where, benches get sort of degraded over time, maybe the lawn's not mowed, maybe there's trash. So the question that we have here is, if you all have ideas of how the city could partner with local community coalitions, nonprofit organizations, does anybody know in particular of different groups that might be willing to chip in and help out? So it's more of a civic engagement along the riverfront to maintain some of these amenities and less of a burden to the city. So it looks like people are somewhat mixed here. There's quite a bit of chatting happening, which is great. This is really a critical piece. You know, there are a lot of wonderful intentions, but without follow-up, consistent maintenance, it's hard to keep the things that we build beautiful. And we all want to have pride in our city and make our city beautiful. Leave it open just for a little bit longer. Okay, there we go. So it looks like most people don't have ideas at the moment. If anybody thinks of something, please reach out, let us know. We've got quite a bit more time left on this study, so we'll definitely be investigating a lot of these possibilities. Okay, so we're going to open it up to discussion. Just before we do that, I want to point out that you can stay involved with the study. Keep in the loop on this Weebly page here, albanyshoreline.study.weebly.com. We'll have relevant updated information on that website as we move through the study. The other thing that would be awesome if everybody could do, and it's been great that people have been chiming in on the polls, but we also have an online survey that's somewhat more extensive that we will be using to develop our recommendations. And tell your friends, please, to take the survey. We would love to get all the feedback we possibly can. And then if you just have ideas, questions, concerns, input, you can always email the planning department at dpd@albanynewyork.gov. So with that, I'd like to open the floor. I'd love to hear from you all. Let me know what you're thinking.
You can use the raise your hand feature so that we can unmute you when you're able to talk.
Looks like we've got 2 participants raising their hands.
Okay, so I'm gonna, hi, this is Lauren. I'm gonna allow Rebecca to talk here. I think she had her hand
Perfect.
up.
Okay, so I just want to say thank you very much for having us involved in this process of planning for the waterfront. I'm actually the president of the Albany Rowing Center, and I think we may have a couple of other members of our board participating today as well, who are also all Albany residents. And a lot of us are down in the Corning Preserve multiple days a week. So we see a lot of the other people that are using the space, and we all really enjoy getting to use the space. And so mostly at this point, I just want to express enthusiasm for this study, and also note that we're very much interested in being a partner in this project. We have a public access doc that was a product of a previous collaboration with the city of Albany. So we put the dock in every year and we take the dock out again as well. And so that helps to provide some of the boating access by the boat ramp. And in using that space, we've noticed that there's some erosion of that section of bulkhead as well, which has made it very difficult to access that part of the river. And we're also very much concerned about climate change changing the flood patterns along that section of the river, and which is also making it difficult to maintain access to that part of the water. And along with that, one of the things that many of our members really appreciate about this section of the Hudson River is all of the really wonderful natural habitat and natural scenery that can be seen from the river. So there's a ton of wildlife, and the green space is just really wonderful. And we noticed that if you travel, south along this portion of the river, you hit a lot of very industrial area. And so altogether, we're really looking forward to seeing the outcomes from this study.
That's awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. So make sure that you keep in contact. Please, share your contact information with the planning department, and they can keep us informed about your ideas. We will be taking extensive notes throughout this presentation, so we'll certainly have a record of your comments. But that's awesome that you want to chime in, and certainly your group would be extremely well positioned. You know the place very, very well, and you're going up and down the shore to provide us with some sort of inside knowledge of what you're seeing day to day out there. So thank you.
Thank you.
And we have your email address too, so it'd be great if we can talk offline to get more of your comments in, and we'll get that in early so we can build it into the study.
Yeah.
It'd be great to collaborate.
Okay, so thank you, Rebecca. Next, we are going to have Nancy Beard, and I'm asked to unmute you now. Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, this is Nancy Beard, and I actually work for the Hudson River Estuary Program with New York State DEC, so it's really exciting to see your study coming along. I had one question with the work that we've been doing up and down the Hudson on access resiliency. The issue of ice dynamics in the Hudson has come up. And so I'm just wondering if you're incorporating that into your study and looking at the Albany shoreline, because certainly in the upper river, the ice can, have its own significant impacts. And then I just wanted to let you know, if you haven't found it already, across the river from you in the Rensselaer County, they did a study a number of years ago looking at all of their access sites. And so you might just want to take a look at what your neighboring county across the river has done. It wasn't so much shoreline stabilization, but that was sort of that was sort of part of it. They were just kind of inventorying their access sites countywide. So I just wanted to toss that in too.
So that's really funny that you bring that up, Nancy. Dan and I actually worked on that project.
Oh, great. Oh,
yeah,
cool.
So we're the ones who selected or did the inventory of all the access sites and helped make recommendations about where they could improve access.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
great.
so we're
That's
pretty
great.
familiar with that.
That was a really nice study.
Yeah, it was. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Oh,
good.
And so to go back to your original question, though, about looking at ice dynamics, we have a number of reports that we've been reviewing that look at the hydraulic regime and some of the ice dynamics up in the area. And so we will definitely be factoring that into the study. Because it is a planning level study, we can only get so deep into it.
Yeah.
So we would love it if you've got any information that you could share with us. We would love to have any data that you might have that we can incorporate into the study, because we certainly are looking at that.
Yeah, good. Okay, great. Good to know.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else?
I'm not seeing any more hands raised right now.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions? And if you don't think of anything now, please, feel free to email us at that DPD at Albany. And I think on the webpage there may also be a spot to leave comments as well. So we're not done taking input, just when this meeting ends tonight. There's, you can always reach out to us.
Right.
Something.
And the survey will be open till December, so please feel free to spread the word about the survey. That's a good format for us to get feedback as well. So it'll be great if you can pass that information along, and we're really looking forward to hearing all your feedback and comments, because all of that will build into the study. So if there are things you want us to explore, please do send us an email, or we're willing, we're open, available to chat with you about it. So it's great that we had so many of you come and attend this meeting. I know it's taking time from your busy personal lives, so we're really grateful that we could see so many of you today. So thank you so much for your time. And we look forward to seeing you at our next meeting in March. And we'll keep you informed and involved. And we look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.